Creating an outline. So first things first, your prep. You need to read and understand your primary articles and know what experimental observations led the authors of each paper to begin their series of experiments. That is, what's the background? Why do we start here, and where do we think we can go from here? Identify the hypothesis for each of your primary research papers. What's the major question? Read through their methods and identify the experimental tests that they did, the controls that they used, and if there are test subjects, what criteria did they use for picking those particular test subjects? Investigate the technologies that you don't understand. So if they're using a technique that you don't understand, then how can you discuss it? So you will need to at least get a definition for the technique so that hopefully you have some insights as to what it's good for. And if you have questions about experimental techniques, then you should talk to me or anyone else who's got a little bit more experience to see whether they have some insights into the technique that was used in the paper that you were reading. In the results section, you'll look for the primary experimental findings. These are the results that they are going to build their argument on for the significance of their particular study. And then, how did they interpret their work? That's what you want to know. To implement this information, to put it into play, you have to decide what's the overarching theme of my research paper. What question am I asking? And so think about how your research comes together, what's the common theme, and how each of your primary papers addresses that theme, and that can help you to start to plan how to put the paper together. Think about which papers have you identified as primary sources and which ones are supplementary sources. The primary sources you're going to talk about in depth. The supplementary sources, you might just use a bit of the information that you find there. You might want to make a note with each of your supplementary papers which elements you thought were important that you might want to include in your final report from that paper. And then, for those pieces of information, where do they belong in your research paper? And already mentally you're starting to build an outline. You need to decide on an organizing theme. Whether your outline will be bulleted, numbered, do you have bold paragraph headings, just something so that there is a logical definition of the sections of the paper. Then start thinking about the flow of information, and I think it's best to start with a general idea and then move to the more specific cases. So if your paper is on asthma, first you would discuss the difficulty that people have with breathing that is attributed to a disorder like asthma, and then you might get into more specifics of what has happened to their lungs to cause them to have asthma. General to specific. As you move through your outline, then you can start to build in headings and subheadings. In your introduction, you might have a background, a hypothesis statement, and then some information on each of your primary papers. Put the headings in, and this is just the beginning of the outline, and then start to add some details. You want to write in full sentences so that for each bullet point of your outline, you know exactly what should go in that section. Try to minimize the amount that you employ shorthand that is sort of non-specific. If you have a paper that's written by Rose et al. And was published in 2017, avoid calling it paper number 3. Paper number 3 may be a brief way of referring to it if it's the third paper on your list, but it's also not very informative if you look back and say, now which was number 2 and number 3? So if you refer to it as Rose et al., then that defines it more specifically. or if you define it by the journal it was published in and the year it came from, try to make some specific references to your work that you're going to use as reference so that it's easy to find it later. Your outline should have an introduction, method section, results, discussion, and bibliography. In the introduction, you're going to talk about why the research is done, what's important, what's the major question. In the methods, you'll define which type of test subjects were used for each of the studies that you're focusing on, and also what kind of analytical techniques were used, and perhaps even what kind of data analysis. In your results section, you should extract some of the major findings from each of your primary papers and talk about what that particular result means in the context of the experiment it was done with and in the context of how you'd like to compare your two primary papers. And then in your discussion, you try to pull everything together and say, given what we started with, the background information, and these new experiments that have revealed new information, we come to these conclusions. Of course, as you're going along, you're going to build a bibliography, and these are all the papers that you would like to refer to. There may also be some websites or textbooks that you include in your bibliography. Make sure that you're consistent in the way that you refer to all of the references, and that helps to build your reference list in a way that's similar to what you would see at the end of any of the publications that you've been reading. Now, here's an example of an outline that was turned in a couple of years ago by a student. It gives us a title for the paper, mutation of BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes causing predisposition to certain cancers. Gives us a hypothesis statement. The BRCA1 gene as a stem cell regulator is why some certain breast cancers are caused by the BRCA gene family. Mutations are so aggressive and occur much earlier in life than other breast cancers. So the hypothesis is that this gene acts as a stem cell regulator, and this is why it causes the mutations that cause cancers. They have an introduction, and in their background information they give us several points that they think should be included as background information. In the methods section, they say that they're using human test subjects. They had medical histories from each family. The members of the family, with and without the cancer, went a genetic test to see if those with cancers had cancer due to the genetic variation, the BRCA or BRCA gene, and then testing of stem cell characteristics. Brief overview of results here in the outline, and then go on to the discussion. Now you can find this outline on the assignment page for this presentation. You can look at it in more detail. It just gives you an example of how you might organize information for your own outline. Of course, the paper had a bibliography. At the time that the outline was written, they only had 3 references for the outline, but that's okay. This is a preliminary, or 4 references, excuse me. This is a preliminary state of the paper. It should not necessarily be a complete paper or a complete bibliography, but as you add information to your paper, you will certainly want to add the sources of that information to your reference list. So when you write your outline, any information that you have that you plan to use should be in your bibliography. Now, there are tools that come with your word processing software that help you to build outlines. In Microsoft Word, in the Home tab, there are bullet points and numbered points, and you can build a multi-layered outline structure very easily, and you can change the levels of the outline with these tools. Also, if you're using Google Docs to prepare your document, you find similar tools there. And in both cases, with these tools that you might use to write your paper, there's help available through the software. Also, in both resources, there are tools that help you to build a bibliography and format the bibliography according to standard publication procedures or requirements. And so you should look at picking a standard for how you're going to format your references and make sure every reference conforms to that standard. So, getting started. You start with your major headings for your outline. You add ideas that you think belong in each section. Sometimes when you're working on a process like this, you've got a lot of information that you've looked up. It's okay to stop, do something else for a while, and then come back to it in case if things are starting to look a little fuzzy. If you think, I don't know what else I need to add to this, put it down, watch a television program, stream something on Netflix, go for a walk or a run, come back, and then take a fresh look at it, and it can help you to perhaps see what you couldn't see before in the midst of working on the outline. The same concept applies when you're actually writing the paper. If you feel like I've been working on this paper for a while and I need a little mental break, take a break. Come back, look at it with fresh eyes. It helps a lot. So, in review, we want you to think about taking the information that you put together to create an outline for your research paper. Now, for your research paper, you're going to need 2 primary papers and at least 6 secondary research papers. Now, I know that many of you will find some information that is just found, say, on a website for the American Diabetes Association, if your paper's on diabetes. And that information may be useful for writing your introduction. If they cite a source for the information, then perhaps you should get your source material from the cited source that they use, rather than to just quote the American Diabetes Association. But if there is no citation, then you can use the website, but it is not a research paper. And we want you to get most of your information from research papers, so if you have website citations, they do not take the place of the fact that we'd like you to pour through some research papers to get material to support the arguments you make in the project you turn in at the end of this term. You have an outline deadline of July 9th at 5 p.m. If that's a problem for you, if you're going away for the 4th of July, please let me know in advance so that we can come to some other agreement. But I do expect that by the 9th of July, you should be able to have found most of your primary references, some of your secondary references, and to be able to build an outline of the paper that you will eventually turn in at the beginning of August. Well, good luck on the project, and I will be expecting to hear comments from you if you have questions.